verses. Matthew chapter number 8. Matthew 8. And we will begin in verse number 5. Can you shut that? Thank you. It says, and when Jesus was entered into Capernaum, there came unto him a centurion, beseeching him and saying, Lord, my servant lieth at home sick of the palsy, grievously tormented. And Jesus saith unto him, I will come and heal him. And the centurion answered and said, Lord, I'm not worthy that thou shouldest come under my roof, but speak the word only, and my servant shall be healed. For I am a man under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to this man, go, and he goeth, and to another, come, and he cometh, and the servant do this, and he doeth it. And when Jesus heard it, he marveled, and said unto them that followed, verily I say unto you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in Israel. What was the essence of faith in this passage? Submission to authority and comprehension of authority. All right? Here's a man that had a servant. Right? The servant was under his authority. Did I misspell that? Centurion? Whatever it is. But he said, I am under authority. He didn't say I'm a man of authority. He said, I am under authority. Right? So he had an authority over him. Now, he could have gone to that earthly authority and said, I've got a sick servant, what do I do? But he recognized that in this instance, the authority necessary and the authority that had power to do something about this wasn't his earthly authority, although, biblically speaking, his earthly authority was ordained by God. Romans chapter number 13. Right? All power comes of God. Every authority is ordained by God, even bad authorities. Paul wrote that about the people that were going to behead him. So even bad authorities are ordained by God, and God can remove authorities if God chooses to, but sometimes God allows bad authorities in our life to test us, to try us, okay, to purify us. So he recognized this authority in this statement, but he also recognized that there was a higher authority, and that was Christ. Right? And he went to the higher authority. And he said, I'm a man under authority, and I have people under my authority. And I recognize this chain of command, if you will, right? That chain of command matters. Because if a person removes themselves from the chain of command, they remove themselves from the blessings of God. They remove themselves from the authority structure that God has in their life. And when you remove yourself from that, you can't have the same protection God intended for you to have. There is a level of protection that is found in being under authority, like I mentioned about my wife and the statement, you know, if you make a bad decision and I'm still submissive, God can judge you and bless me. And that's really where the comprehension of authority and the essence of faith come together. That's why it says, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as unto the Lord. Chain of command authority, right? So that concept, when Jesus heard from the centurion, he said, that's great faith. Knowing and understanding authority is the essence of faith. But it also showed a secondary principle here, and that is the power of authority through that chain of command, if you will. The trouble we have in a relationship to authority in the position of authority is often not recognizing where our authority ends and trying to take more authority than we actually have. So, when I was the pastor of Beth Haven, if I were to, I had, several staff members. One of my staff members, my son-in-law Keith, he was over the youth, and had another staff member that was over, another area. And often it was the case where people would serve in ministries and they would overlap serving in different ministries, right? Where they might be in the youth and then they're also in another ministry, maybe so let's say the choir. And my choir director says choir practice is at X amount of time. And if Keith, my youth director, would have come into the choir, let's say, and said, hey, these teenagers, they're not going to sing that song. And the choir director said, what's that about? What are you talking about? Well, look, I'm their youth director. They're under my authority. And I'm telling them not to sing that song in the choir. Does he have the authority to do that? No. He doesn't have the authority because his authority extends only to the youth department. In other words, they're not under his authority in all areas, just when they're in the class for youth. If they're at an activity for the youth, he has authority to say this is what we're doing. But he's not over the choir. So he doesn't get to go to the choir and say, you can't sing this song because I'm the youth director, right? I use this illustration. If we're driving down the highway and I've lost my mind and I let Angela drive this truck in the fifth wheel, right? Trust me, that is losing my mind. She does not want to do that. But she's driving and I say, I want you to go 100 miles an hour, right? That's faith. For me. That nice gentleman with the lights on his car pulls her over. He comes up to the window, and I say, hey, buddy, you get out of here. I'm her husband. I told her to drive 100 miles an hour. I own this car, and I'm her authority. Right? And what does the officer say? Assume the position. Right? He gives me some new jewelry, introduces me to nice people, right? Taser, yeah. Feel the power, right? The thing is my authority as her husband does not extend to permission to break civil law. Right? If I go to a judge and say, Your Honor, I think this is ridiculous. That woman's my wife. The Bible commands her to obey me. And that police officer interfered in her obedience to me. What's the judge going to say? Well, you some kind of a nut? You don't understand the delegation of authority? You don't understand where your authority ends and civil authority begins? Does that make sense? So my authority as the husband extends in the home to home matters. Now I'm going to take it into another illustration of the church. I had a situation once, years and years ago, where a lady was teaching a Sunday school class. And I told her, I want you to teach this curriculum. And her husband came and said, I told her to teach something else. And I said, you don't have the right to do that. He said, I'm her authority. I said, not in that Sunday school class, you're not. She doesn't have to be a teacher. But when she walks in that class as a representative of this church, she's under my authority into what she's supposed to teach. Okay? So if you don't want her to be a teacher, that's between y'all. But if she's going to be a teacher, she's going to teach what I say. That's how authority works. men often, they love their own authority. They do. They just love their own authority. But your authority is not limitless. Only God has omnipotent authority. Okay? So it's important to recognize where authorities, what area they have authority over. Now, I am not disrespectful if I tell an authority, even one of my own authorities, hey, that's not your area of authority. I will follow you in every area of authority you have. But that's not an area you have authority over me in. That's not disrespectful if I have the right heart and attitude in. Okay? But that's often where conflicts arise. Pastored for 25 years. Almost every conflict we had in church was over a question of authority in reality. Who had authority over that area? And it was always somebody wanting to push the authority out or take control from the authority or angry about someone having authority over that other than them. Right? So it was this conflict of pride against authority. And as we understand that structure, it simplifies things. Authority structures simplify things. I had the privilege of pastoring a number of folks that were in the military. And quite honestly, there are a lot of hardships in the military that people endure. Okay? But one of the blessings of the military is you know who's in charge and who's not in charge. Right? And that command structure, it simplifies things. And it's easy to be a good soldier. All you have to do is do what you're told by the right person. Right? But if someone outside of your command structure comes along and starts giving you orders, you're not obligated to obey those orders. Matter of fact, you can get yourself in trouble to obey those orders. So you have to know who's the authority in this area. And then you submit to that authority. So what happens when we talk about areas of where there's problems of, well, what about a husband that's telling his wife to do something sinful? It blows my mind, but I have had people approach me and say, I have a friend that goes to a church. The husband wants her to start being involved in swinging, and her pastor told her that she needs to submit to his authority. I would say the pastor has some problems. B, her authority in that area is actually God. Because God has explicitly commanded her to keep purity to her husband and not to commit fornication. There's no question about that in the Bible. Abstain from fornication. That's clear. So her authority of her husband in that instance has stepped out of line from the authority of Christ. That's where it's okay to disobey authority. But disobey in a sense of obedience to a higher authority. Does that make sense? Not in a sense of rebellion to an authority, but rather in a sense of obedience to a higher authority. When the disciples were taken in Acts 5, and they were commanded, don't preach in the name of Jesus anymore. What was Peter's response? Whether we ought to obey God or man, but as for us, we have to obey God. Now, were the authorities that commanded them not to preach in the name of Jesus legitimate authorities? Yes, they were. However, those authorities stepped outside of their real realm of authority. And as such, the disciples were saying, the realm of authority you're trying to interfere in doesn't belong to you. It belongs to God. Now, we'll submit to go into jail, but we're not going to stop doing what God has commanded us to do. A wife is well within her right to say that to a husband who is asking her to commit sin. Here's the problem. That's true. And this is true. Most of the time, husbands aren't asking wives to commit sin. The wife just doesn't like the decision he's making, so she says he's not following God, therefore I can't follow him. That is not what we're talking about. Right? She's to submit to God and to her husband, and she's not to be constantly looking for the exception clause. Well, I just don't think he's right with God, therefore I'm going to walk what I think is right, and so forth. So she creates this situation where she's the judge of authority. And God never called us to be judges of authority. He called us to submit to authority. And so we have to watch that process. But is there an exemption when an authority steps out of its proper role? Yes, there is. But it's a narrow exemption. Okay? It's a narrow exemption. And we need to be cognizant of that. And also as authorities, we need to be cognizant of the fact that our authority is not limitless, right? And trying to take authority that doesn't belong to us. I'm going to tell you my opinion, and I think that this goes even to the idea of the home. This might not be popular, but it's okay. God committed the authority of the Great Commission to the New Testament church, not to the family. And when someone surrenders to the call of God in their life to preach the gospel, the pastor ought to be involved in the decision of how they're trained, not just mom and dad. Now, if they're just going to go to college, that's between them and their parents. But if they're going into ministry, God didn't commit the gospel commission to the home. He committed it to the church. And I'm not saying everyone has to be trained in their local church, although I do think that that's the preferable and best manner. Right? I have no problem with cooperating together for training. I do have a problem with colleges usurping the authority of young people outside of their church and essentially co-opting them and not sending them back to their pastor. We have a policy here we have a school, we train folks from other churches, but our requirement, if they stay in our dorms, they have to call their pastor every week. And they don't get to make decisions as to where they're going to go as interns and so forth without the authority of their pastor. We're not giving them permission to go do those things. That's between them and their pastor. Even though they may be living here, they're still a member of that church because we're cooperating with that church. We're not taking their place. That's their pastor. That's their church. That's the authority they were called under. And if that authority wants us to cooperate with them, we're more than happy to cooperate with them to train the young people. But the problem is we've got this mixed up perceptions of authority. And so people like, well, I'm going to tell my kids where they're going to go to college. Well, I'm not against most colleges. Some, not most, all. I'm talking about independent Baptist colleges. And by the way, I think that sometimes God may lead to send a kid to a school that may not be 100% exactly what I would be, because they need to be tested in an area. That's a possibility. I have no problem with that concept. I do have a problem with the idea that the pastor isn't involved in that process because he's their pastor, right? And that church authority. Now, again, that might not be a popular position, but it's a question of authority. Okay, so let's take it into this realm of counseling specifically, okay? When we counsel, we often have the problem of having one party in the room and the other not. So marriage counseling is what I'm referring to here. It's not uncommon for a husband, or more often a wife, to come for marriage counseling and their spouse being unwilling. And that wife wants you to tell her, she wants to tell you all the ways her husband's wrong, and she wants you to fix him. Right? The problem is that the way you counsel her is to deal with her about her lack of submission to the authority God's put in her life, and she ain't going to like that. But that's the reality. So how do you deal with that in those situations? Well, there are times where we might write a little letter and send it home and say, dear sir, thank you for allowing your wife to come and get help with the struggle she's been having. And I wonder if you might be willing to share with me some of the things you think she could work on. Right? It's not uncommon that he'd be willing to do that. Right? But what happens in that situation is we begin to engage, him, whether it's by letter or whether he says, I think I'll go to a guy like that for counseling. But I tell her up front, look, if you want him to be fixed, you got to be right yourself. All right, go back to 1 Peter chapter 3, because I want you to see this is the essence of marriage counseling when there's a conflict and a problem in the home. 1 Peter 3. Remember, the context of this whole book is what? Submission and suffering, right? So in chapter 3, he says, likewise, you wives, meaning when you are suffering because your husband's not doing right, be in subjection to your own husbands. That's the first thing. So, well, my husband's being a jerk and he's not doing right. I believe this is a great passage if you got a wife whose husband's lost. This is a perfect passage for her. How should she be dealing with her husband? And by the way, vice versa. You got a husband whose wife's lost. I've had both circumstances. Typical for a wife who's got a lost husband to try and berate him into becoming a Christian. All she does is drive him away. Okay. Well, what should she do? She should behave like it says right here. Because if she will, he'll say, man, this is weird. Must be something to this Christian stuff, right? Not just become hardened to it. And likewise, a husband, if he'll do these things, I specifically, I won't, but I could give you names of men whose wives were in rebellion to God and unsaved, and they started doing the things that are listed here, and it changed their wife's heart toward God, and the wife got right and got into church, and they have a happy home, right? Why? Because when we respond properly to suffering, it's a testimony to people around us, even to those closest to us. And you could probably share stories from your church of maybe people that have been in the hospital and going through just terrible circumstances, but they had a right heart and they were kind and they were a witness, and how the nurses and the doctors said, "You're unusual. What's this faith you've got? Why are you so different?" Right? It's an awesome thing. It's the same in the home. All right, so he says, wives, be in subjection to your own husbands. If any obey not the word, they may without the word be won by the conversation of the wives. While they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear. Whose adorning, let it not be the outward adorning of the plaiting of hair, the wearing of gold, or putting on of apparel, but let it be the hidden man of the heart, which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which in the sight of God is of great price. And he goes on and talks about trusting God in the next two verses, which we already read. So here's the process for her to deal with suffering when she has an authority that is out of bounds. And we're not going through the man because we do that in other classes, but it's the question there is he's suffering because of his wife. But here, it's her suffering because of her husband, who is her authority. Okay, so how does he say to deal with that situation? One, submit to him. Just submit to his now, if he's saying, I don't want you to obey God, submit to God. But do it with kindness. I love you. I'll submit to you in every area that isn't contrary to what the Bible says. Okay? I have to submit to God, but I'm going to submit to you in every other area in our marriage, right? And then it says, he'll be won with, by the conversation of life. That means the way she behaves, while they behold her chaste conversation coupled with fear. But he says, if they obey not the word. One of the things we do, we'll often do a little dynamic with a lady, and here's God, and here's her husband, and he's not obeying God, and here she is. And we'll give her a nice little dress and long, beautiful flowing hair there, and bangs, because this is the 80s. She had big bangs, all right? So, don't you miss the 80s? All right. So typical is she barks at him, you know. She's telling him, why aren't you the kind of husband that the pastor is? Well, that'll win him. He's going to really want to be around the pastor now, you know. Why aren't you the husband like Sister So-and-so has? He takes her to church, and he prays with her, and they read the Bible together, and you're just a jerk, you know. And so that's really going to woo him, okay? So God says, stop nagging, okay? That doesn't work. And I don't understand why. In the history of marriage, thousands and thousands of years, never has nagging worked, and yet women are committed to it. My wife's not in here, so I can say stuff like that. All right. So what is she supposed to do? She's supposed to take it to God, and she pours it out to God. All right. She lives a life pleasing to God, submitted to her husband. She doesn't grumble and complain and murmur and tell him how bad he is. She just pours it out to God. God, I want my husband to be right. I want my husband to walk with you. I want my husband to lead the home like he ought to. God, would you convict him? God, would you teach him? God, would you draw him? And because she has taken herself out of the way, God is able to really work on him, and God is able to convict him like he wanted to. And you say, well, why didn't God do that while she was nagging? The reason is because she wouldn't have believed it was God. She'd have thought it was her. She has to get out of the way for God to work. So when she gets out of the way and she starts submitting and she starts praying and she's living a Christian life in front of him in a genuine way, God begins to really work on his heart, and he begins to desire to want to get things right. His heart is soft toward the Lord. Notice the things it says not to do. So first, don't try and nag him with your words. He may without the word be one. Right? Word there is rhema, the spoken word, the utterance. Okay. Whose adorning let it not be, verse 3, the outward adorning, the plaiting hair, wearing gold, putting on apparel. Now, I know that there are people that take those verses and try and make them say, you know, hey, women shouldn't fix their hair, women shouldn't wear gold. I don't think they ever go to that place where they say women shouldn't wear apparel. So it's a little bit disingenuous to use it that way. Right? So what is he saying, though? What he's saying is don't use manipulation. Because this is the tactic that if it's not nagging, it's manipulating. Don't try and manipulate him into doing what you want him to do. Say, look at what you're missing out on. Got my fixed up hair and I'm wearing jewelry, and look at this, look at this dress, you know. And you're really missing out. If you could have all this, could be yours for the low price. That's manipulation. Don't do that. Then he says, let it be the hidden man of the heart, which is not corruptible, the ornament of meek and quiet spirit. Meek means she needs to quit taking offense at him about everything. Stop being offended when he's doing wrong. Don't take offense. That's your choice. Being offended isn't a choice. In other words, having offenses happen toward you. That's going to happen. That's not a choice. Taking offense is a choice. I don't have to take offense. Someone might do something jerky toward me, and I say, I don't know how you meant that, but here's how I'm going to take that. I get to choose how I'm going to take it. That's my choice. I don't have to be offended. Right? But then he says that quiet spirit, and he doesn't say quiet mouth here. In other words, don't ever talk or give him the silent treatment. He says quiet spirit because ladies can, they have this ability. Men do too. But ladies are better at it. They have the ability to be silent and loud at the same time. Right? And you walk in the house and it's like, honey, are you okay? I'm fine. That's the worst word in the English language. Fine is the worst. And I say, it seems to me that something's bothering you. Nothing's bothering me. I'm fine. Okay. I'll be on the roof if you need me, Right? So that doesn't happen anymore. That hasn't happened for us for a long time. But I have a ladder built on my fifth wheel. I can just go. I don't even have to get a ladder out. I just go straight up, So anyway, but the quiet spirit means you have rule over your spirit, and that's really what it means. You have rule over your spirit. You don't have to let your spirit out of control, even when someone else isn't doing right. And it's hard when it's your husband not doing right or your wife not doing right. It's hard to control your spirit, but that's exactly what he says to do. Okay? So the point in this part of the discussion here today is this aspect of authority is what he's talking about here. So understanding the role of authority even in marriage counseling makes a big difference because God says specifically you still have to submit to his authority, and you've got to do it with the right spirit, and you've got to quit taking offense, and you not try to manipulate the situation. This is how he says to respond to an authority, even when they're wrong. Again, not when they're asking something sinful, but when they're not doing right. They're not doing right themselves, okay? I still have to follow that in submission. I still have to allow myself to have the right spirit, all of these things, and that's the counsel. Okay, I say that because the tendency is to try and figure out how to help or manipulate him into doing right. That's what our tendency is. Well, let's see. What could we do to get him to do right? Right? And by the way, there's nothing wrong with her praying a hedge for him. I teach ladies in that circumstance, pray a hedge. But submit. Pray a hedge. But have a good spirit. All of those things matter. So understanding authority, it is key to being able to counsel properly in this regard. Okay? So that's the important aspects. Now, the book, The Authority Principle, I cover that, and I kind of deal with some other things in there also. And so I do recommend that you would read that. But principally, those are the ways it applies specifically into counseling. Okay. All right, let's do some Q&A and see what things. We only have 3 hours left tomorrow, And tomorrow we're going to get into some details on kind of tying back, a little bit of tie back to anthropology class, where we're going to talk about the diagram of man, and we're going to take a lot of the stuff we've approached here and apply it back into the diagram of man that we cover in anthropology, which if you took classes some time ago is what we've replaced the wheel with. Okay, so the wheel is everybody's favorite thing in counseling. But no longer the wheel, now it's the diagram of man, all right? So, but we're going to make application back. And one of the reasons we do that, we cover some of these things repeatedly because repetition is the key to memory. And if you hear something once, you get a little bit of it. By the time you've heard it 4th, 5th, 6th time, you're starting to go like, oh, okay, I see where that applies here and how it works there and all that type of stuff. And you can start tying it together and be better in the front of your mind to be able to use when you're in those counseling situations, okay? So, all right, so let's do some Q&A, though, some questions here. Who has questions over things we've covered in this class? Is this about Ryan?
Yes.
Yes,
no.
okay.
How would you counsel a wife who wants to leave her church, does not want to leave her church, but her husband wants to? And this is not about my husband. No, but I mean, in a church.
You say that so Randy and them know. By the way, this is not Ryan.
It's Randy.
It's Randy.
No, but really, so he's disgruntled in church, but she knows it's not God's will for them to leave.
Okay, wait a minute.
She believes that.
She believes that.
She believes that, and he's leaving wrongly. Everything he's doing is against the Lord, and she doesn't want to do that.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Would he be going to another church of like faith if he left?
Okay, let me just tell you the scenario. He did. He went to another church, and guess what? He did the same thing at that church, and then he left that one, and now she's in like the 3rd or 4th church, or 5th church.
Okay.
So how do you deal with
okay, all right. But there are churches where the gospel, the truth is preached. He's not taking her to.
Sometimes it's not. They've gone to non-King James. They went to churches that don't preach. They have work salvation.
Okay, all right. So that's why I'm asking.
Some of them.
Okay, so here's what I would say, is that if she needs to follow the principles here, and she needs to say to her husband, it's okay to say to her husband, I can't in conviction to God go to a church that doesn't preach the scriptures, doesn't teach the word of God. But she needs to keep a right spirit and submission at home.
And she has.
And she needs to, but she also needs to obey God. But the problem in saying that is that doesn't mean that she shouldn't follow her husband if he's willing to go to a church that preaches the gospel, right? That has the biblical truth, okay? And she needs to pray a hedge, and she needs to follow what the Bible says, and then as much as possible submit to her husband's leadership in regards to their spiritual placement. But up to the point where he says, I don't want to go to a church that preaches out of the Bible, or I don't want to go to a church that then she needs to say, I have to answer to God for that part of my spiritual life, and I'm going to follow you in every other area, but I believe God wants me to go to church still.
Perfect.
Okay.
That's what I told her. So
Okay.
it's perfect. Thank you.
All right.
I'm a good student.
Hey, self-accolation. That's right. Let another praise thee and not thine own lips. All right. So the third Marcy. Oh, that's great. Oh, no. Oh, no. All right. Other questions?
This is about past. No.
Okay.
No, you say pray ahead. You've mentioned that a couple times.
Okay.
Can you define that?
So, praying a hedge is a principles taught out of Job. So turn over to Job first. chapter number 1. In verse number, Job 1. I'm sorry? Yeah, I know. Wait, I heard pages still flipping, so actually, we're going to start in verse 6, so. All right. There was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. The Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? And Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said to Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job? There's none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil. Satan answered the Lord, Doth Job fear God for naught? Hast thou not made a hedge about him? So there's the hedge. And about his house, and about all that he hath on every side, thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and substance is increased in the land. But if thou wilt put forth thine hand now, and touch all that he hath, he will surely curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power, only upon thyself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. So he's lowered the hedge, if you will. He said, here's the areas you can touch, and here's the areas you can't touch, right? So in the rest of that chapter, there's the things that happen. His family dies, and his cattle are taken, and all that type of stuff. And then in chapter number 2, verse 3, the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job? There's none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil, and still holdeth fast his integrity, although thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause. Satan answered the Lord and said, Skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life, but put forth thine hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said to Satan, Behold, he is in thy hand, but save his life. So the principle here is that Satan can only do to a child of God as much as God permits. All right, God allowed Job's trial, and it's important to understand that also, and to accept God's sovereign design in that God is not out of control when we are facing trials. And sometimes our trials are the will of God to prove us, to test us and purify us. And yet also to recognize Satan cannot do beyond what God says he can do. Okay? All right. So I'll erase something and draw this up here in a moment, but go to Hosea. Hosea. Right before Joel. Right after Daniel. How's that? Is that better for you? Hosea is about a prophet who God says to get married in Hosea 1:2, and he says, go take a wife of whoredoms and of children of whoredoms. So God specifically told him to go marry a prostitute. And they begin to have children, and just for simplicity's sake, their children's names are, pretty sure this is my kid, I'm not sure this is my kid, I'm positive this isn't my kid. They're 3 kids. Which would be weird growing up with that name, right? Your name's what? But she goes off and goes back into sin, chapter 2, verse number 5. Their mother hath played the harlot, she hath conceived them, hath done shamefully. She said, I will go after my lovers that give me bread and my water, my wool, my flax, my oil, and my wine. And he says, therefore, behold, I will hedge up the way with thorns and make a wall that she shall not find her paths. She shall follow after her lovers, but shall not overtake them. She shall seek them, but not find them. She shall say, I will go and return to my first husband. Then it was better with me than now. For she did not know that I gave her corn and wine and oil and multiplied her silver and gold, which they prepared for Baal. Therefore will I return and take away my corn in the time thereof, and my wine in the season thereof, and will recover my wool and the flax given to her in her nakedness, and I will discover her lewdness in the sight of her lovers, and none shall deliver her out of my hand. And it goes on there. Okay, so the concept here is that God has control over us and protection-wise, right? So if we're here and God has his hedge of protection around us, Satan, he can't get to us, right? He can't get into the protection. God's protected us. And God has this protection around us, according to Job, and as you know, we're in his will. That doesn't mean he doesn't allow Satan to try us and so forth, but you know, God's protection is here. Now, if my wife, in this instance, in Hosea, my wife used to be in this hedge of protection with me, right? But she decides she's going to leave. Oh, we got to give her the big 80s bangs. Right? She's going to leave. She's not going to stay with me. You don't like the bangs? She's not going to stay with me. She's going to pursue something else. And this goes husband or wife. So she's out here pursuing sin, okay? And in her sin, she cuts her bangs. Right. So, yeah, lost her hairspray. So what do I do? Well, Hosea's statement there was, I will hedge up her way in that way. And he's not talking about physical force or something. He's asking God, put a hedge around her because she's out here pursuing pleasures and, you know, things that are wicked. And put a hedge around her so that she can't find, just like Satan can't get to me, she can't get to those things that she thinks she's going to find fulfillment in. And I'm asking God to put that hedge there to prevent her from finding fulfillment in those things and to show her that her life would be a lot better if she was back here with me. Right? So we say pray a hedge, that's what we're talking about. We're praying not only for, not necessarily for protection from consequence. We're praying for recognition of sin and for a recognition that these things aren't satisfying. These things aren't going to be what brings satisfaction in my life. I will say it is a very powerful tool. I've had people who have come for counseling who were already divorced, who I had start praying a hedge, and within just a few months, that spouse contacted and said, I'd like to see if we could work on getting our marriage back together. So, I mean, I've seen it be a very effective, very powerful tool in many different circumstances. So, but it's essentially, it's acknowledging there's nothing really I can do. I'm giving it over to God. I'm asking God to intervene in this situation. So, does that answer your question? All right. If this is about bangs.
No, Randy and Leah are having issues, so she wanted me to ask this question.
Wow.
Just teasing. Leah would like to ask this question. So she said, if we have a hedge of thorns around the spouse and we pray that hedge, will it affect the kids and them? And she says it will affect the whole family if, like, let's say Randy went off the deep end. And
Further?
Further. But let's just say that he does, and she starts praying a hedge of thorns about him. Whatever God does, it will affect her as well as the kids.
Well,
but it's already affecting
It's quite
them.
possible that it will, but it's not a matter of in a way that would be detrimental, because you're asking God to bring them back to, but quite frankly, we don't know what that would take, so it might be something that affects you and the kids, yes. I mean, that's fair. All right. Yep. He's first.
This is a youth pastor question. So when it comes to authority, and obviously you're not trying to usurp the authority of the parent, you're trying to minister to the teenager.
Thank you.
But if the parent is teaching something that's not biblical, how would you go about that tactfully, in the sense of, one, testimony's sake for the other kids in the group, if it's something that's I'm trying to think of a more specific example without being general. Dating and hand holding and such. So do I need to elaborate any more, or do you
No,
think?
I understand.
Okay, thank you.
I'm pretty perceptive about stuff. So, in that context, there's two parts that you need to recognize. One is the parent has the right to give parameters to their kids that are different than yours. You're not the parent. But, two, the parent has to respect the parameters of the church when they're present. So that's the connection. And then if it's a problem, then you go to a higher authority, right? So you would go to the pastor and say, hey, I've asked them to respect this rule when they're at church. They're upset and they don't want to because they say they're the parents, and that's true. They have the right to set the rules, but when they're here, they're impacting other people, and how would you like to proceed with that? Now you get the higher authority involved. So I've been doing this long enough to know that there are people that do not respect the authority of youth pastors. So you appeal to a higher authority if they won't respect the rule is given. Okay? All right?
What would be your recommendation in trying to, I had it from both sides in that there's a pastor that he had a chronic problem of not staying in his lane or his area of authority and overstepping the authority of the family and trying to control things. And the family was saying, well, we want to leave because it's a chronic problem with him constantly interfering in our area of authority and wanting to control things, like say when we go on vacation. With one person, it was that the daughter was interested in this other member of another church of like faith, but he had a past, and so then he had AIDS. No other problem spiritually or anything. The family is for it, but the pastor says, no, even try to get a hold of the other pastor. We need to put the kibosh on this, do all of this, and both the family's all for it. Everyone, he was the only one. He says, no, we need to put the kibosh on it. So, because of this constant problem that he was interfering in the lane of the families, many families are saying we want to leave because he's not staying he's wanting to overstep those bounds.
Okay. There's, in my opinion, 3 reasons that are biblical for leaving a church. One is doctrinal error that the church will not correct. Okay. 2 is sin that there's no repentance for. And 3 is greater service God's called you to. Okay. Depending on how they have approached that with the pastor, who said there's multiple families, the role of authority is something that is probably addressed in the context of the bylaws of the church, in the sense of what the pastor's role is in that. If the people of the church go to the pastor and say, Pastor, this isn't your place, we love you, we want to follow your leadership in all these areas, but telling our kids who they can marry and can't marry is not your place. That is outside the bounds of the pastor's authority. Then it comes down to whether or not the pastor will accept that And if he won't, and he insists on trying to usurp authority, he's now outside the bounds of that if they've approached it properly. And in such case, it falls into that area of doctrine, because authority is a doctrinal question. But I would be very deliberate and patient with that process. I wouldn't rush that process. So authority is weird. I've had people come to our church that I had some folks come to our church one time and said, hey, I need to know what kind of car to buy. And I'm like, buy a good one that is a good price. Like, I don't know. I prefer this type of car, but like, pray about it. And they go, no. I mean, like, I need you to tell me. Like, I'm not telling you what kind of car to buy. No way. I had people tell me, I need you to tell me what job I should take. Like, nope. Not my job. I have a phrase, because I went to ACE. Y'all ever do ACE? You ever do the monkey pace? This is my favorite pace. If you've never done the monkey pace, you ought to do the monkey pace. It's excellent. And so we have a little phrase Angela and I use: not my monkey, not my circus. That's between you and God. I don't want to be blamed for your car breaking down. You not getting a raise. Pastor, you told me to take this job and I didn't get a raise, and like that's between you and God. I don't understand pastors wanting to take authority that they shouldn't, that doesn't belong to them. I don't understand that, but there are a lot that are that way. No, they're not. There's not a lot that are that way. There are some. It just seems like when you hear about it, you're like, oh man, that's so crazy. But anyway, all right. Last question.
All right, so I had a guy attend our church. He want to make sure I use King James all the time. He is in a non-denominational church, and his pastor started using a different version of the Bible, and he wants to meet with me. Now, I don't know, his salvation story is right down the line, how he got saved. Now, the church, I don't know how all that believes. So
It's a local church? Or local enough?
I would say so, yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's in the other town, but so he wanted to talk, and the Lord didn't allow me to talk to him on Monday before I came, because I was trying to work it out. And then I was trying I got like an hour free time, and he said, I'm going to need more than an hour. So this is going to be there's going to be a lot more to it. So do I need to call that pastor, or, because I can tell you he's using the Passion, and he don't like that.
The Bible version?
Passion, yeah. Passion translation, yeah.
What is it?
Passion translation.
Oh,
It says
Okay.
it's emotion and love and thoughts is about it. Yeah.
well, obviously I haven't read it, and David has, so we'll take
I
his
just
opinion on it.
just looked it up on
So,
AI. But I mean, because you're talking about authority, but I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
I've preached his son's funeral when his son passed away, because the pastor said some things then that he didn't agree with, that the son needed to get right with God.
So the question is this a church that preaches the gospel properly?
No, sir.
Then I don't consider them to have authority. Now, I said that earlier. If they don't preach the gospel, then I don't believe they're a church that is. And I'm not even saying, if they were a non-denominational church, but they did preach the gospel, people could get saved, I would still honor their authority, even though I would never recommend someone to attend that church. But if they are not gospel preaching church, then I would meet with the guy. However, I would tell him before he could come, this would be me, pastorally speaking, I would say before you come, you need to sit down with the pastor, and you need to try and show him what the Bible says and whether or not he would get right and do right or not. Okay. because you don't want him to come in bitterness and offense to authority. It's about not just his current situation, it's about his future situation, because if you disrespect the man's authority, even though he's not a gospel preacher, you disrespect that authority, you're going to demonstrate disrespect to authority, and that'll come back on you eventually, right? So it's like I say to husbands, your wife and your children submit to authority in the same manner you demonstrate submission to authority, right? So you still want to show a demonstration of respect to authority, even though this is a church where, hey, if you were going to come here and that's where your baptism was, you're going to have to get baptized, right? That's a submission to authority question. Now, if you've been disrespectful to authority, then why would he submit to that authority? You understand what I'm saying? So you got to approach it with that principle.
I got you.
That's what I would say. All right. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., our last 3 hours. And if you are leaving tonight, thank you for coming. We appreciate everyone that comes. Next year, we will be doing Lid 2. We'll be doing the next of these classes, okay? And there's 4. So the next 4 years, Lid 1 was this year, 2, 3, and 4, the next several years. And so if you're able to come back, we'd love to have you. And we're going to have dinner, and then service starts at 7, and we've got a graduate tonight we're still in class, y'all. We've got a graduate tonight. Brett is back here, and Brother Brett is graduating from the counseling seminary, and he's getting his certification and his master's in counseling tonight, and so we'll be doing that during the service. So he's going to be bringing a 45-minute testimony about all the counseling tips he has for us. I'm just kidding about that. All right, so we're going to go eat, and then service starts at 7.